them very, very carefully, and you also worked very hard to enculturate, to keep the family traditions alive. So I won't go into this detail. I have a whole paper on this in a volume that Rajkumar edited on building culture at IIM Ahmedabad. So I won't go into it. There's a lot of additional material. So very quickly, let me show you one last slide, because I don't want to just mention American examples. I want to give you the example of another institution that I fell in love with when I first came there, that is the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. So, an extraordinary story of building culture, which I tell in that volume. But the key, let me give you an example of how culture was built. A young assistant to Professor Mote, who was one of the legends at IIM Ahmedabad, some of you may recognize him. He just passed away recently. He had a young assistant come in from Bengal. His name was Jahar Saha. He was educated in Bengali medium, was not very comfortable in English, and they had a shortage of faculty, so Professor Mote said, please teach a couple of classes for me. Now, Jahar Saha was very diffident. He said, look, I have never really spoken in English. I know how to write English, but I can't teach in English. So Mote basically said, that's okay. You write your lecture out in English, which you can do very well, and then you read it line by line, and I will be your student, and I will critique it line by line. And once you have done that, then you can easily go into the classroom, and then you can teach. So he did that, and the story doesn't end there. He is then hired as an assistant professor. He becomes an associate professor. He becomes a full professor, and then he becomes the director of IIM Ahmedabad. A person who was so diffident in the early days that he thought that he had no future at IIM Ahmedabad. So that is how you build culture. And I go in great detail. I won't talk to you about all of that. And so now may I take, with your permission, just 2-3 more minutes to put the finishing touches to all this. So where did this come from, and where is this going? So for the past 10 years, I have been on this manic research drive, almost sort of confined to the 4 walls of my office. And it started with a simple tribute that I had to American universities, because I spent more than 20 years there as a graduate student and as a faculty member. And then even when I came back for 6 years, I was jointly with Duke and IIM Ahmedabad. So I had almost a 30-year association with great American universities. And I was not completely satisfied with the answers to why they were so great. They are great. I mean, that's one of the greatest things that America does. America dominates higher education in a way that no country has ever dominated any industry. So I thought that the traditional answers were not correct. So my hunch was that it had to do with their governance. Hence the paper, Why Are US Universities So Good? The title of the paper is a little catchier. It's called Why Is Harvard Number One? But I talk about that. And so it started there. But then I gave a talk in Aix-en-Provence to Cercle des Économistes, which is one of the largest gatherings of economists in Europe. And I was in a panel on what makes for great universities. This is now 2012, July. So I'm on this panel, and the elite academics and the elite of Europe are there, judges of the International Court of Justice, and so on. I have the Swedish education minister on the panel, the head of McKinsey, a couple of Harvard professors, and then I'm speaking about American universities and why they are so good. This table that I just showed you, this alumni table and all the implications of that. So then I just asked innocently a question. I said, so I'm going to talk about great universities, but can you tell me where the university form was invented? Nobody knew the answer. And then one prominent venture capitalist got up. She said, the Greeks. And then she used 2 words that penetrated straight through my body and hurt me, of course. And I said, no, ma'am, it was not the Greeks. For 1800 years, India had the best institutions of higher education. And the Greeks only had academies. They had little schools of a few hundred students, but not really full-blown universities. So basically, I then decided, so it's very unusual for a book to be born in a very specific time in a very specific place. But in 2012, that book was born. And then this is the overview. This is the history that I'm telling in that book. 1800 years when India dominated higher education, 6th century BC to 12th century AD. This is not known outside. 700 years when Europe was prominent, and 100 years when the US has been prominent. And this is a quick timeline of the big picture. On the left is Greece and India. On the right is China, the Arab world, and Korea and Japan. So the earliest university is Takshila. I actually, since I do a lot of work with CEOs in Pakistan, I actually have spent a full day in Takshila. I took hundreds of pictures and looked at the medical instruments in from the medical school at Takshila in the 5th century BC, excavated at Takshila, the surgical instruments. And then the Greeks only had academies. And then Nalanda from the 5th century AD to the 12th century AD, Vallabhi from the 5th to the 8th century AD, Vikramshil, Udantapuri, Jagaddal, and Sompura. These were 7 great international universities. I'm telling that story. This is in 14 languages, 7 primary languages: Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Chinese, Tibetan, and Greek, and Persian, and 7 secondary languages: Hindi, Gujarati, Bengali, French, German, English, and Russian. So all the materials are in these languages. It has been a crazy quest to synthesize it, and I was going nuts. So just the last couple of slides. So the first dagger was thrust in my heart in 2012. This was the second dagger. This was around 2015. When I was researching the European university, I came across one of the most outrageous statements in the history of scholarship. This is from a 3-volume study of the history of university in Europe by Walter Reed, Cambridge University Press, 1992. This is a direct screenshot. It says, the university is a European institution. Indeed, it is the European institution par excellence. There are various reasons for this assertion. As a community of teachers and taught accorded certain rights, such as administrative autonomy and the determination and realization of curricula, courses of study, and the objectives of research, as well as the award of publicly recognized degrees, it is a creation of medieval Europe, which was the Europe of papal Christianity. This is shown in the first volume of our history. I'm going to show in my book and in the several papers that I have now delivered all over the world that every one of these points and more was present in the Indian ecosystem, and that's my final slide. So I mentioned that there were 16, a great modern university has 22 layers. 16 of those layers were invented in India, recreated in Europe, almost in the same order. This is the funny thing, that the university form has been created not once but twice. They solved the same problems and came up with almost the same solutions in almost the same order. That is what I'm demonstrating in the book that I've just now started to write. By the way, you can get this slide and a lot of others in the MIT talk. So if I gave a talk at MIT a couple of years ago, if you look at MIT, my name, and the future of the university, you'll get all of these slides and you can take a look. That summarizes and gives you the evidence for each of these 22 points. And that is what the book is all about. All right, so, and then finally, this is my last slide. We tend to forget how wonderful this institution is and how long-lived. So this is from Clark Kerr, the great the first chancellor of the University of California system, who personally built 3 of the campuses of the UC system, one of the great monuments of human engineering, the University of California system. And he says that in 1520, exactly 500 years ago next year, there were 80, so of the institutions in the Western world, 80 institutions still exist. 70 of them are universities. The others are the Parliament of Britain, the Parliament of the Isle of Man, and one bank, the Bank of Siena in Italy. But other than that, the universities are the longest-lived institutions known to man. And it's tragic that every one of the 7 institutions in India was destroyed, was physically destroyed. If they had not been destroyed, they would still be with us today. And the reason why I mention this is because we have a huge burden on our shoulders. All of us who are in the business of creating universities, we are creating one of the most interesting and one of the most interesting monuments to human ingenuity, human thought, human creativity, one of the most useful, indeed transformative institutions, the likes of which, until we saw it, we never saw it. So it is really a feat of human engineering. So with that, I must conclude because I think I've gone over by 5 minutes. I wanted to make 2 or 3 other points about how this could be applied, but perhaps that can come out in the Q&A. In any case, I should probably stop here. I could go on for several days, I can tell you that much, but thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Professor Mehta, this was an excellent talk. I think one of
you.
the best I can say.
Thank you.
In the last 2 days. My question to you is that you spoke about alumni engagement.
Right.
And I firmly believe, and we've done this at Symbiosis, but unfortunately the Indian government regulators do not allow. The new regulation, at least for the deemed universities, says that you need to have only academics on the board.
It's a gigantic mistake. I'll tell you. So by the way, the Prime Minister saw some of this work, and he personally made sure that the IIM bill has alumni representation. We were shooting for 2/3, but only 1/3 currently, only 1/3 of the board members of all the IIMs are required to be alumni, because the thinking is they can come through the other routes as well. So you need women, you need people from the other various segments of society. So my hope is that the IIMs, at least the well-established IIMs, would have a majority of alumni on the board very soon, if not already. And one of the things that we will be pushing for is making sure that the new IIT bill incorporates this. Think about what IIT Delhi can do if the IIT Delhi alumni have a role in taking IIT Delhi forward. It will unleash the